Well, let's ponder on some of this. Joining us from central London, our studio there, lecturer at King's College London, Dr Adam Elliott-Cooper, and the lawyer Luke Gittos is joining us too. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to both of you. Adam, if I can start with you, one thing that comes across in Martin Brunt's report there from Glasgow is the age of some of these knife assailants. I mean, we're talking about very, very young men.
We certainly are, and I think at this time in particular, when we've seen over 600 youth clubs close, we've seen over 3,000 youth workers lose their jobs, hundreds of thousands of some of the most vulnerable young people in this country no longer being able to access the youth services and the early intervention services that can help to prevent violent crime. I think we can learn a lot of lessons from the situation in Glasgow, where they've reinvested into communities, put money into youth services, and made sure that they don't punish people for carrying out crimes, but they prevent them from happening in the first place.
Well, you'd want them to be punished if they've carried out the crimes as well, wouldn't you?
Of course, yeah, okay, but I think that most people would prefer the crimes not to happen in the first place rather than simply wait.
No, understood. OK. Luke, you query whether we are actually looking statistically at a great avalanche of knife crime.
Well, the picture nationwide is very complicated. You know, the rate of national knife crime goes up and down consistently. It's very difficult to draw any patterns. It's absolutely true that there is a particular issue in London with a particular section of London's society, which is young, working class, black and Asian men. And I think we do have to deal with that problem head on. And I don't think the solution actually is, I don't think it can be blamed solely on cuts to government services. I think that this is a deeper societal problem. We need to go a little bit further than merely saying people are drawn into serious violence because of the closure of youth clubs. You know, you've seen the closure of youth clubs up and down the country, and other areas of the country just don't have the same problem. So I think we do have to consider the specifics of the problem in London.
And what do you think they are, Luke? What do you think they are? Luke, what do you think those specifics are?
I think it's a complex social problem, and we need to respond to it in an authoritative way, because frankly there is a section of our society who are dying on a regular basis because of our failure to act. And I think stop and search can legitimately fit into that picture. What we've seen over the last 2 years is, as stop and search has dropped off, violent crime overall has increased slightly. Now, there could be all sorts of reasons for that, but I think we need to be very, very careful about resisting particular policing measures because of particular sensitivities. I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, go on, Adam. Yep.
I think this is really important. This isn't about particular sensitivities. There have been government studies as well as independent academic studies looking at the effectiveness of stop and search on reducing violent crime. And both the independent and the government studies have found that there are no reductions whatsoever in violent crime when we increase stop and search.
So, Adam, your
this isn't
message...
about sensitivities, this is about evidence-based analysis.
All right. What about lived experience? I mean, for instance, Martin Brunt's piece there had an interview with an assistant Metropolitan Commissioner, lots of experience, policing, frontline stuff, who said unequivocally, stop and search works. You think he's talking rot?
I think when he was asked the question, how do we convince politicians that stop and search works, he said by using stop and search effectively. The police have not been able to use stop and search effectively. In the report that you had looking at Glasgow, what they did was they used early intervention services, they used social workers, they used youth services, and that has had a marked difference on the effect on knife crime and reducing knife crime in that particular city. I think it's important to also mention the fact that when it comes to London, we mentioned black and Asian people as being specifically being a specific cultural factor in this kind of increase in crime. But there's no mention of race when it comes to Glasgow, which I think is quite interesting. So even though that Glasgow can be cited as one of the most violent places in the developed world, we don't mention race, but as soon as it comes to London, when there are black and Asian people, suddenly we do. And I think there's an issue of racial disproportionality there.
I can't really say what we were saying about Glasgow 12 years ago. Memory's not that good. OK, Luke, the contention is, and it's an argument that we've ventilated before on this news channel many times before, that there is a political dimension to stop and search, which means, and the Prime Minister has accepted this, certainly seemed to have accepted when she was Home Secretary, that it is unconscionable, whatever the objections of some of her serving police officers.
I can certainly understand the aversion to stop and search, given the police's history with racism. You know, you don't have to look far back in the force's history to see that these powers have been used extremely discriminatorily in the past and have been applied in an extremely racist way. But I think we do need to look at the problem in today's context, and I think pretending that there is no issue specifically among young black and Asian men in London, I think just ignores the reality. It fails to engage in the specifics of this problem. Now, of course, the same issue isn't said of Scotland, but we should also remember that Scotland has seen a huge increase in stop and search, and it was part of that was part of the way of combating knife crime in Scotland. So stop and search has played a part in Scotland, and as stop and search, as I said, has dropped off in Scotland, we've seen small increases in the rate of violent crime. So I think we need to be specific about the problem in London. I don't think we can be scared of using particular measures because of the history of our police forces, and I think we really need to start recognising that, of course, it's not true that being black or Asian makes you more likely to commit these kinds of offences. That's not what anyone is arguing. But there is also no evidence that the police today are racist or discriminatory in their use of these powers. And I think we need to reconcile those two things and become comfortable with saying certain things that today people seem to simply be ignoring.
Okay, there are three profoundly incorrect things you've just said. Number one, that there is no evidence that the police use their powers in a discriminatory way today. That is completely untrue. Every single study which has been carried out since the Macpherson inquiry in 2000 has found not only are police more likely to stop and search young black people, they're more likely to arrest them, they're less likely to arrest them for caution, they're more likely to charge them. At every single juncture of the criminal justice system, black people are treated in a disproportionately harsh way. I think the second thing it's important to remember is that when it comes to serious youth violence in London, around 50% of the people involved in serious youth violence are black and or Asian or minority ethnic, and around 50% are white, roughly proportional with the youth population of London. However, the Metropolitan Police have labelled over 80% of the people that they've identified as being involved in gangs as being black. And so what this does is reproduce not only the racism in stop and search and in arrest and in charges, but also in how we label different types of crime as well. And not only is this racist and discriminatory, it's wholly ineffective in reducing crime and making London a safer place for all of us.
Can I come back on that quickly?
You can. Final point,
I think the mistake would be to, if you look at the Bradshaw study, for example, an extensive study into the use of stop and search, you found absolutely no evidence that these powers were being applied in a racist way in today's context. But let's not fixate on the scholarship here. The fact is that if you think that today's police forces are going out there and applying these powers in a racist and discriminatory way, I think you're just wrong. I think the reality is that in London we face a specific problem amongst particular groups of people. It's quite clear now that young black and Asian people are more likely to become involved in and be victims of knife crime. And I think to sort of disseminate the reality through appeals to different pieces of scholarship, I think are wrong. If you look at the Bradshaw study, you'll see that the police do not apply their powers in a racist way, and I think that's important to recognise. And I think this kind of discussion, where we become fixated on race and we become fixated on culture, actually holds people back from policing this in an effective way.
Well, gentlemen, we've got to leave it there. Luke Gittos, Adam
You brought up
Elliott-Cooper,
race, not me.
Sorry, we've got to hold it there. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your time.